Welcome to the Behavior Foster webinar. My name is Amanda Bolus. I am the Behavior Foster Care Associate, and I am going to take you through this webinar today. Before we get started though, if you could go grab yourself a piece of paper and something to write with. One, so you can take notes, and two, because there are a few questions along the way that I'm going to want you to write the answers down. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about learning theory so you can get a better understanding of how animals learn. We're going to talk about body language to include cat, dogs, and ours. And then we're going to talk about some of the expectations in the home when you take a behavior foster home. So to get started, what is learning? Learning is really simple. It's the knowledge required through experience, study, or being taught. Basically, it's an internal process, but living equals learning. So you can see in this picture what this leopard learned rather quickly. So just our day-to-day things by trial and error, we learn things as we go. Some factors, though, do contribute to behavior and to that whole learning process. So some internal factors that we as humans, when interacting with animals, have no control over. So age, for example, age is when you have puppies and kittens, for instance, you are going to have a lot more mouthy behavior because they are learning the world through their mouth versus an older animal that maybe spends a lot of time sleeping and isn't really doing a lot with their mouth. Species, dogs do different things than cats, than sheep, than horses. They do something specifically because of the species they are. You can go even further into that and talk about breed type. So breeds, when we think about breeds, we think more often with dogs. But a lot of those breeds out there were bred for some specific job. So you do have some behavior characteristics that are due to that breed that that dog is. Even further into that breed line though, you do have that bloodline. So take that border collie that does herd sheep. You have the border collie that's been bred generation after generation to be a working dog. And then you have that border collie that's just been bred at home and has spent a lot of time on the couch. They both have that desire to herd, but that one that has been bred to work every day, generation after generation, it's just so much more hardwired into that dog to do that actual task versus that couch potato that still is motivated to herd, but it's not as high of a drive. Gender, males do different things than females, and then being altered or unaltered can also affect that behavior. And then health status. If your animal is experiencing some sort of medical concern, that can actually lead to other behaviors. A common one is as dogs get older, if they develop cancer or a brain tumor, it can actually lead to things like seizures, but it can even lead to aggression. And then lastly, individual. Every animal, just like every person, is different, and so there's just certain things that behavior-wise that these animals do just because of who they are. Some factors that contribute that are more external that we do have a little more control over. So ongoing treatments. An example of this is if you have an animal that's suffering from allergies. A common way to fix that is by a doctor prescribing prednisone. Prednisone, however, is a steroid that does cause the animal to drink a lot more water. That water intake can then start to cause an animal that never soiled before, they may start soiling in the house again. So that prescription that was prescribed is actually having side effects that are leading to other behavior issues. And then learning, so more of that behavior modification. So training and behavior modification where you actually are trying to work on a specific behavior to change it. Socialization, so that is something that as far as the age of the animal, we don't have control over. But what you do have control over. So when puppies or kittens are really young, it's very, very important to expose them to a lot of different things. We call it the rule of 7. So 7 different people, 7 different substrates, 7 different noises. The more things they are exposed to, the more well-rounded they grow up to be. However, a lot of people don't always well socialize. So cats, for instance, people don't take their kittens and expose them to a lot of things. And a lot of times with dogs, especially little dogs, people might carry them around and take them places, but if they don't actually have them interact with people and other things, they're truly not socializing. And then you have trauma and jackpot. So these two things are actually more in the eye of the animal. So you can't determine what is traumatic or what is a wonderful experience, but you can be mindful of that. So for instance, trauma that can happen at the vet's office. So you can really help to make that a pleasant experience, so it's not a traumatic experience. It could be more of the jackpot experience that really helps them to have good experiences all the time when they go to the vet, versus that traumatic experience that now it's really hard to go to the vet. Some other factors that contribute to behavior that we sometimes have control over, sometimes not, is the environment. So the first thing being food. So the type of food and the amount of food that you feed could be causing other issues to arise. So for instance, if you are not feeding a higher quality meal, your animal is not really absorbing all those nutrients, and things are just really passing through fairly quickly, which means that while you're trying to potty train your puppy is constantly having to poop, and it gets really hard to get that animal on a schedule to help with the whole potty training. Smells. So animal sense of smell is so much better than ours. So for instance, if you have an old animal that started having some incontinence issues, which means they weren't able to hold their bladder, well, that animal passed away and you thought that you had cleaned all the old spots, but maybe you missed one or two. Then you go adopt a new animal. That new animal is going to be able to find those old spots, and they may start house soiling as a result of that. Sounds is really part of that socialization period, but again, not a lot of people socialize with all different things, including sounds. So a common thing that we see with behavior and fear is things like fireworks. So when fireworks occur or thunder, the dog or cat can be very afraid, and they can start to be destructive, they can be aggressive. So really helping them get through that sound. Sights. A great example I like to do with sights is the picture of the cat at the window. So your cat may do really well with another resident cat. They get along great. Well, then you have this neighbor cat that likes to come and sit in your yard or sit at the window. Well, your cat inside, because cats are very territorial, starts to get really agitated by that cat outside. As a result, your cat can start to house soil or even become aggressive to the other resident cat, even though before they always got along. So what an animal sees can really, create a behavior or not. And then lastly, there's the environmental opportunities. So if you take a look at this fun comic, you have a guy that's taking his dog for a walk. He's enjoying his time, the guy is. The dog, however, is looking every which way and seeing squirrels. So all he's thinking about is squirrels. So they get back to the house, and the guy says, nothing like a nice long walk to clear one's head. Whereas the dog is just pooped and overwhelmed by all the squirrels. So being outside was actually more overwhelming for him, whereas it was relaxing for the guy. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some types of learning. So the three main types are habituation, classical conditioning, and operant conditioning. So habituation is simply getting used to an occurrence. So something happens over and over and over, good or bad, but basically the animal starts to habituate to that. So this is, for example, you have what we call the loss of the cry wolf effect. So think about that boy in the story, the boy who cry wolf. So he would always cry out that there was a wolf when there wasn't always a wolf, and then eventually when a wolf came, nobody listened to him. So a great example of this is actually with prairie dogs. So when prairie dogs communicate that there is a predator, they have different alert calls. If you take that prairie dog colony and you put it next to a trail, for example, every time a human walked by, if those prairie dogs were to call out, that would take a lot of time and energy because there's always someone walking on the trail. So those prairie dogs actually start to habituate to the humans because the humans never do anything to them. So they stop calling when they see humans, and they save those calls for when they see dogs, cats, raptors. This basically is a decrease in response to a repeated occurrence of stimulus. So some other examples are for birds, for instance. When they're baby birds and they're in the nest and you have all these leaves falling, well, that initial motion may be very scary, but leaves fall all the time. So after a while, the bird starts to realize that those leaves are not going to hurt them, and they start to habituate. And then a great example for people when it comes to feeling. So for instance, if your pant leg is rubbing against your leg, well, at first when you're young, that's going to be a weird feeling, but that happens a lot when we walk. So you start to habituate to that feeling, and it doesn't bother you anymore. Basically, habituation enables an animal to disregard unimportant stimuli. This can be good and bad when it comes to animals habituating to people. So the first side of the fun comic is, oh, it's one of those hairless snack machines. I hope it's a granola bar. Well, unfortunately, sometimes animals habituate on the positive side. They see that people actually provide good things. What we really want, though, is this bear on the other side running away because it saw a human. So sometimes habituation can work in favor of the animal, but can also work against an animal. Then we have classical conditioning. So classical conditioning is basically an association between two things created by always presenting those two things together. So basically you're just pairing two things up over and over and over. Sometimes we have control of those pairings, sometimes they just happen. The thing with classical conditioning to remember is the animal's actions or response has nothing to do with the pairing. So it's not how the animal acted, it's just the fact that the two things were paired up. So a great example of this, if you can think back to your school days, is Pavlov's. So he paired ringing of the bell with food, and that did result in the animal salivating. So what happened is over time he would pair bell, food, bell, food, bell, food. That happened enough times that he could then just ring the bell and the dogs would still salivate because they were still anticipating that that food was actually coming. So some other examples that a lot of times occur in our household are the food and can opener. So a lot of times when we feed our cats or dogs and we have canned food we're providing them, we use a can opener. So as that can opener is going, the animals start to realize, oh, when I hear that can opener, it's usually with food. So now when the can opener goes, they'll come running, even if you were opening up a can of peaches. Leaving and jingling of the keys. So a lot of people have a process they go through when they're getting ready to leave. They maybe put their coat on, tie their shoes in a certain place, or when they grab their keys, they jingled it, not even thinking about it. Well, the animal starts to pair these things up. So every time mom and dad leaves, something happens, like jingling of the keys. So now if the owner were to just grab the keys to, move them somewhere, the animal may still start to be anxious because the jingling of the keys usually indicates that the owner is leaving. Another common one, this one we unfortunately have no control over. So a lot of times when a storm comes in, the clouds start to roll in, the wind starts to pick up, and then thunder occurs. For those animals that were never socialized well with sounds, thunder is a scary thing. So sometimes a thunderstorm does not ever actually occur, but when the clouds and wind start to pick up, that's when the animal starts to become fearful and either run and hide or become destructive. So they aren't responding anymore to the thunder, they're actually responding to the storm coming in. Next example is the doorbell and arrival of visitors. So some animals love when people come over, so they get really excited because usually when the doorbell rings, people come in. Every once in a while, though, the doorbell rings and nobody comes in. So you have a doorbell going off, you have your dogs barking, your animals running and hiding, whatever their response is to people coming over just from the doorbell, even if it was just a delivery man. And then lastly, this is a very common one, kind of goes back to that traumatic experience. When we take our animals to the vet, they get examined and then they get their shots. So if that happens every time, which we usually only take our animal to the vet once a year for those shots, they start to make the connection that going to the vet means pain's going to happen. So depending on what you do to take your animal to the vet, for instance, if you take your cat in a carrier, the moment you pull out the carrier, your cat starts to become fearful and anxious because that carrier has been connected to the vet, which means pain is coming. When you get a chance, we do have this really fun video. We were having some issues uploading it, so you can take time at the end of this webinar to watch this video. This is just a classical conditioning video with a show called The Office. The next type of learning is called operant conditioning. So this is basically the process by which the frequency of a behavior is modified as the result of pleasant or unpleasant consequences immediate following the behavior. So basically, in simple terms, this means that a behavior followed by some sort of consequence is going to alter the frequency. So if you look here, you have a behavior followed by a good consequence, that is going to increase the frequency. You have a behavior followed by no consequence, decrease the frequency. And then if you have a behavior followed by a bad consequence, it's going to decrease, but the behavior is going to decrease at a faster rate. So back to your school days again. This is from B.F. Skinner. So he had that famous rat box that he put a rat in, and there was a lever. He found out if the rats pushed the lever and got something positive, like a treat, they were more likely to push the lever. If the rats pushed the lever and got nothing, they would start to decrease in pushing the lever, but they would still once in a while try it. However, if they pushed the lever and they got a shock, they were going to stop pushing that lever, but at a faster rate. So they may do it one more time or no more times because they did not want to get shocked again. So that consequence that follows that behavior can really alter if it increases or decreases. We have another great video on operant conditioning. So again, when you get a chance to the end, if you want to click on this link, this is operant conditioning, and the show that we got it from is The Big Bang Theory. So a pretty fun way to look at how humans can be conditioned using operant conditioning. So operant conditioning does kind of fall on a few things. So some things have to happen for operant conditioning to work. So timing is really important. So animals live in the moment. So if you take too long to give that consequence, it be a good or bad, that animal is not going to be able to pair the two of them together. Animals' perspective is really important. So if you think telling your dog no is effective, but your dog is like, oh, I don't really care that mom said that, they are not going to alter that behavior because from their perspective, telling them no means nothing. Same on the flip side with the positive. Your dog may eat a milk bone, but is he willing to work for a milk bone? He may just take it from you and eat it, but if you're going to truly do training with it, you're going to want to find something of higher value. And then not all consequences are controlled by us. So there are certain things that occur without us being there. So when animals do certain things like chewing, for instance, if they chew on your shoe, they get instant satisfaction. So either they were bored and they were chewing, or they were young and they were teething. Either way, chewing on the shoe provided instant gratification, and that consequence was good, so they're more likely to continually chew on your shoe. Okay, so now what I want you to do as we dive more into operant conditioning is I want you kind of to retrain your brain a little. So when we talk about positive, I want you to think of adding something. And when we talk about negative, I want you to think of removing something. So first we're going to start with a good consequence. So the reason we want you to think of adding a negative is because you can have positive reinforcement and you can have negative reinforcement. So if you have a behavior followed by a good consequence, remember that is going to increase the frequency. We call that reinforcement. So positive reinforcement means to add something the animal likes. Negative reinforcement means to remove something the animal dislikes. So some examples, so some positive reinforcers are food, praise, attention, touch play, access to a toy, or access to a place. So all things that the animal likes. Negative reinforcement then is removing something the animal doesn't like. So removing fear, discomfort, pain, or a threat. On the flip side, the bad consequence that follows a behavior, we're going to actually call that punishment. But again, you can have positive punishment and negative punishment. Positive punishment means to add something the animal does not like, and negative punishment means to remove something the animal does like. So some examples or different types of punishment. Positive punishment would be your classical thing when you think of punishment. Physical pain, intimidation, fear, but something we do actually recommend aversives, which we'll go in a little detail later. Negative punishment would be withdrawal of a desired place. So if you were engaging with your animal, you can take your animal, if they're playing at the park and it's not going well, you can take your animal away from the park. So you're taking them from a place they may want to be. A classic example is if you're engaging with your animal and they do something, then you stop playing with them. You just walk away. So as we talk more about operant conditioning and what we do here at the shelter, we are all about positive reinforcement. So we did want to touch a little bit on positive punishment. So we do not recommend positive punishment because it can have some side effects. This is by no means to say if you ever used this before that you did anything wrong. We just want you to help you understand why we don't recommend it, why positive reinforcement is better than positive punishment. So some things that can arise with positive punishment is it can cause fear and distress, may provoke a defensive aggressive response. So you're telling your dog no, you're bopping them on the nose, that may result in them biting. Positive punishment can really destroy the bond of trust you've created with your animal. It can also teach the animal to avoid the behavior when somebody's around. So another form of positive punishment is squirting a cat, for instance, when they are jumping on the counter or scratching at the couch. Well, if you squirt that animal, basically all they're learning is that they need to jump on the counters or scratch the furniture when you're not there. They're not actually learning a different behavior. Another problem with punishment is the animal doesn't always know what you're punishing them for. So remember, the animal lives in the moment. So say you are working on teaching your dog to sit. Your dog runs up to you and you see that there's something chewed up in the background. Well, your dog comes up and sits and you are already telling them no, bad girl. Well, your dog just sat and your dog doesn't understand why you're telling them bad girl for the sitting, when in fact you're technically telling them for the chewed up item in the back. But again, they live in the moment of what they just did. And then the biggest thing is punishment delivered with emotion or anger is usually ineffective, and you can't take that back. It's just like if your boss said something to you and you were really angry and you wrote an email and you sent that email off. Well, that email written in anger, a lot of stuff that you wouldn't mean to say is going to come out, and you cannot take that back once your boss has opened it. The biggest thing though is punishment never teaches the animal what they should do. So we're quick to want to tell our animals, no, don't do that, no, don't do that, no, don't eat that. But our animals are doing things that are normal for them. So back to that cat scratching or getting on the countertop, that's normal behavior for a cat. It's just unacceptable for us. So if all you're ever doing is telling your animal no, you're not teaching them what's an appropriate alternative. You have to figure out, well, how can I allow my animals to still be an animal, but do something that works well, that's appropriate for my family and my situation. Okay, so let's talk about operant conditioning with no consequence. So again, remember, a behavior followed by no consequence is going to decrease that behavior frequency, eventually to the point of what we call extinction. So a great example of this is a dog used to get attention when they greeted their owner by jumping up. Now the owner ignores the dog when he jumps up, so the dog will try other ways of getting her attention. So simply by ignoring something we don't like, so jumping, barking, if you ignore it, your dog will realize that it doesn't pay off and they will stop offering that behavior, which is great. However, extinction by itself is rarely successful. It is better to actually replace it. So instead of your dog jumping up, you can teach your dog to sit instead. That way they are still getting attention, which they want, but you have taught them an appropriate way to get that attention. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I want you to go back to positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. So the best way to really understand the differences is to kind of work through some of these situations. So the first situation I have here for you is that a dog sits and it gets a treat for sitting. So the behavior is sitting, the consequence is a treat. So essentially what you want to think about is, are we adding something the animal does like, or are we taking away something the animal doesn't like? So in this case, we are adding something the animal does like, so positive. And then because the dog is more likely to sit, that's the reinforcement. So the behavior is increasing. So positive reinforcement. So the next example is cat hisses as you enter the room. You stand still. So in this moment, you have to look at, are we adding something the animal likes or taking away something the animal doesn't like? So you are standing still, the animal may like that, but you stopping, the animal may also like that. So in this case, the cat is hissing, so the cat does not want you to advance. So this is what we call negative reinforcement. So the animal is hissing. If you were to keep advancing, the animal doesn't want you to keep advancing, so it can't be positive reinforcement. The cat rather have you stop hissing. So this is where by you stopping, you are essentially taking away. So you're not removing yourself, but you're not advancing anymore. So you are taking away something the animal doesn't like. So that's why this is negative reinforcement. So the cat stops hissing. You approach. Cat hisses again. You continue to approach. So the behavior is the hissing. So now you want to look at it a little differently. You did not stop when the cat hissed. You kept approaching when the cat hissed. So by approaching, you are no longer taking away something the animal doesn't like. You are adding something the animal doesn't like. So this is an example of positive punishment. So this could easily happen in your home with cats that you take. So some of the cats you're going to get are fearful cats. And so when working with them, you really want to take this consideration. So if a cat hisses at you, you want to be mindful of what the cat is telling you, and you don't want to keep advancing on it. We do want to help these cats understand that they are in a safe place and that we are listening to that communication. Okay, so learning can be kind of complicated, and so we can definitely talk more about this to help you really understand how animals learn. We can also talk about maybe some of past animals where you were trying to work on a behavior and you weren't quite sure why the behavior wasn't going away. It could have been something that was going on, the way you were trying to do it, the technique that you were using. So again, learning is something that, again, we all do. So even humans learn by those 3 ways. So understanding that can really help you to understand animals, but also understand people around you as well. So now we're going to dive into behavior modification techniques. So the different types are desensitization, counter-conditioning, flooding, and clicker training, which is the type of training that we are going to have you do in your home. So desensitization, basically it means exposing an animal to a stimulus beginning at a very low intensity and increasing that intensity. So you start at something that's really far away, for example, and then you build up to that animal being closer to that item. Or say you have a person that's afraid of something. A best way to desensitize is you start with a picture of the object, and then you could build up to a stuffed animal, and then you could build up maybe to an animal in a cage far away. So you can kind of gradually increase that intensity level. A way to do behavior modification with desensitization is basically, say you have a dog that is reactive to other dogs. So the best way to help is to find out what distance your dog is going to react to the other dog. You find that distance that your dog is relaxed, then you can start to work on helping that dog feel more comfortable. If you were to start at that dog just a couple feet away and your dog was really worked up, really aggressive, you're not going to be able to change that behavior. Desensitization by itself, though, it can take time. So the best way is to actually do some counter conditioning in conjunction with that desensitization. So counter conditioning is basically training an animal to display a behavior that is counter to an undesirable behavior. So we're not only going to find that distance our dog is comfortable with the other dog, we're also going to pair good things. So you find what your dog is excited for. So again, they may eat a milk bone, but is that really going to help them make good associations with something that's causing them fear, stress, aggression? So if you can pair that dog that they see at a safe distance with something really positive, your dog will start to make better associations, and over time that fear response, that aggressive response, will actually turn into a happy, relaxed response. And then as part of the desensitization process, you can then work on getting the other dog to be closer and closer and closer until your dog is very comfortable with any dog around it. So again, desensitization is just slowly exposing them over time, and counter conditioning is pairing that thing that causes them stress with something else in conjunction with desensitization. That overall is what's going to help your dog get better with what is causing that fear. Flooding. So flooding is basically exposing an animal to stimulus that provokes an unacceptable behavior, usually fear, continuously until your animal habituates to the stimulus. So the first picture, I like this picture because it actually does happen with people, a training technique or a way to work with phobias. is they will expose the person to what they're afraid of until they realize that that thing is not going to hurt them. So this is not about desensitization. You are not starting at a low level. You're starting right there at the thing that the person or animal is afraid of. And you are just going to basically expose them over and over and over until they realize that nothing is going to happen. The ones that we have of the dog and cat, it's very common with fear to want to flood a dog or cat. So basically we have that notion that if I just hold you and comfort you, you will see that I care about you and I love you and I'm not here to hurt you. But the problem with flooding is it can work, it can help people, it can help animals get over their fears, but it can also cause a lot of other issues. So for instance, an animal can become aggressive. Even a person can become aggressive and start swinging, which is probably why that guy is holding that lady's arms down. But a dog may bite, a cat may bite. Another response to being flooded is an animal may just start to urinate and defecate right there. So we are causing potentially a worse behavior to come as a result of that. And because we are flooding them to the point that we're just hoping they habituate, we're not helping them get over their fear. They're not working through it. They're just learning that, okay, maybe it's not so scary. But we do not want to risk the other things that come from flooding. So flooding is not a technique that we are going to have you do with your foster animals, but you may have heard of flooding before, so we did want to talk about it. Unfortunately, the shelter itself, so being in a shelter environment, is a flood. When these animals come in, we have to evaluate them, we have to medicate them, we have to handle them. And so being in this environment alone, animals are being flooded. We just want you to understand that that is not the technique that we want you to take. We want you to go more with the positive reinforcement technique. So here's just a fun thing. Kids definitely like to flood. They like to hold on to their babies. And so if you look at this picture, what's really great about this picture is she's really excited about her dog, but her dog's eyes are really wide and he's kind of just frozen. Like in his mind, he's just like, get this over and done with. So he's not necessarily learning anything good about this little girl, but he is tolerating it, which is really great. So you're going to have animals that are going to tolerate a flood, but we don't know what's going through this dog's mind and what's potentially going to happen as a result of this long term. So the technique that we recommend is clicker training. So clicker training is basically positive reinforcement where you use a clicker to mark a behavior. So you're just using the click for the behavior and then you're following with the treat. So the operating condition component of behavior followed by treat, we're just happening to using a clicker to mark that behavior. And as you can see from these pictures, you can actually clicker train anything. The key to clicker training is to find that motivation. So again, that milk bone, your dog may eat it, but are they willing to train for it? So you really have to find what's motivating. So every animal, even people, can be trained using this method. They actually use clicker training in the human world. They call it tag teaching. So they can use a clicker to mark a certain behavior. So this is common in sports like golfing and gymnastics. So when a person has their golf club in the air, they can click when they're holding it at the right position. Or when you have a gymnast who has their feet in the air, they can't always, see what they're doing by looking up, but they can feel where their legs are. And so the trainer can actually click the moment that their legs are in the right position, and again, they're able to feel it. So clicker training is used both with animals and with people. So some ways to do clicker training. The first way is through luring. So basically you are going to present the treat to the animal and then you're going to have them follow your hand. So for here with this picture, you see a dog sitting. So you present it just in front of their nose and then you go over the back of their head, and as they follow it behind them, their bottom ends up hitting the ground. So then you would click the moment the bottom hit the ground and then provide the treat. You can also do luring to get an animal to lay down. So you just have them follow you down close to the ground until they're completely down. So when you click for behavior, you want to click when they're in the actual position, not hovering. So once they are fully laying down, you would click and treat. Luring is a behavior that we're not going to encourage you to do because a lot of animals learn to only do a behavior when the treat is in the hand and when the treat is basically directing them in the right direction. So we don't want animals to learn that the only time they have to do a behavior is if there's a treat present. We want them to make the connection with the behavior on their own. And a great way to do that is actually through shaping. So shaping is basically taking that behavior, the end result, and breaking it down into small approximations or baby steps. So a great example of shaping a behavior would be teaching your dog to do something like spin, roll over. So in those two things, I would start at the very beginning. So for spin, I want my dog or cat to look right or left. So I'm going to capture my animal looking to the right, looking to the left. Once they do that, I'm going to do that for a few times, but then with any training, we want to progress. So at some point, you're going to stop clicking for just looking to the right, and you're going to wait for them to maybe shift their shoulder. And then once you've done that for a while, you're going to wait for them to look maybe over their shoulders. So the end result is a full spin, but you are just breaking that down into a lot of different steps. Shaping is something that is hard to do in the beginning. So in the beginning, we're going to have you do a lot more easy behaviors, more of a capture component. A dog sits, you're going to click and treat. But shaping is a great stress reducer, so we will talk to you more about that, and we'll actually do a little bit of practice down the line. Okay, so when it comes to training, a lot of people wonder, do I always have to click and do I always have to treat? So clicker training is just a tool. It is just to help your animal learn that behavior. With shelter animals, we are going to have you always click. And always click always means treat. So we're always going to have you do that. With your own animals, though, the idea behind clicker training is that you teach your animal using the clicker. Once the cue is there, they understand it, then you don't have to click for that behavior. Same is true for people. So there are certain things that we like to do, gambling, buying lottery tickets. So what happens is we do these things hoping that we're still going to get the reinforcement for it. So when people ask, do I always have to treat? Well, that is not true either. So for instance, if my dog has learned to sit, what I'm going to do is start to vary it up. So the first time I may treat. The third time, next time, I'm going to treat. Maybe the fifth time. But remember, if you go back to the idea of operant conditioning and a behavior followed by no consequence, remember that is going to cause an extinction. So you have to still treat at some point. Does it have to be food? Not always. You can let your dog outside. You can put the leash on. You could pet your cat when he sits. It doesn't matter what you provide as long as the behavior is followed by a positive reinforcement. So going back to these two pictures, people buy lottery tickets and go gamble hoping that they are going to win. So you have those people that religiously buy that ticket or go up to Vegas or Black Hawk continuously hoping that this is the time. More often than not, they do not win, but they are still motivated to keep going because that prize at the end, if they were to win, is going to be huge. And so your dog, your cat, all your animals are going to do the same thing because they've gotten reinforced in the past. They're going to try it again. But remember, you do still have to reinforce. You just don't have to reinforce every time. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a fun video about clicker training. So if you have trained in the past, you might think, well, I can train a dog, that seems pretty easy, but training a cat, that's crazy. Well, again, if you look at the ideas of operant conditioning, a behavior followed by a positive reinforcement is going to increase that behavior. It doesn't matter what type of species. If you can find the right reinforcer, you are going to be able to train that animal. So the video I'm about to show you was done by Karen Pryor. If you're interested in learning more about clicker training, Karen Pryor has some great resources out there, and she created these videos about clicker training. So the video that she has here is her training a fish. The reason we like to show this, because if you can see a fish learning something, then you're more inclined to think that a cat can also be trained, and that dog, no matter what situation, can also be trained.
1-minute sessions, maybe 2 sessions a day. So a couple of weeks did the job. The first thing we did was to bait the fish back and forth through the hoop. He learned to sort of go where your hand is, and the hoop was at this point rather incidental, except that my finger always splashed the water when he actually went through the hoop. So if it took him a little while to eat the food, that didn't matter. It was what was happening when he heard the splash that counted. Even a fish very early on will begin testing the premise. I was surprised at this. The fish learned to go through the hoop, and then he learned to try to find out other ways to make the finger splash. And here, after he made 2 mistakes, he did it right, but I wasn't ready. He didn't get reinforced, and he had a fit. We had a lot of trouble with this in the first week or 2. I had no idea a fish could get so upset. Lie on the bottom, respiration doubled, broke his heart. We had to learn to back off, give him plenty of time to go through the hoop, help him just a little bit. But here's the final behavior, and this behavior is on cue. We haven't talked about cues up till now. That's going to be the subject of our 3rd video, cues, commands, and how you establish conditioned stimuli. Here are the fish. This fish is under very good control. He's waiting for his cue. The hand position is the signal. He looks, fish perceives signal, fish executes behavior. Tap the water, and then the food, good fish.
I love that video because, again, you can see this fish learning to do something. So that really helps you to feel comfortable moving forward and training those cats that you may foster, and then continually training those dogs. So now we're going to move on and talk a little bit more about some of the stressors animals are going through and some of the body postures that you will be seeing. So first thing I want you to do with your piece of paper is I want you to write down 3 stressors you think that your foster pet may be going through. And I'll give you a few seconds to write those down. Okay, if you couldn't really come up with any, we will go through some so that you can think about. So some of these stressors that your foster animals are going to go through are going to start in the shelter, and then some of them will carry over into your home, some of them will not. So when an animal comes to a shelter, they are exposed to a lot of other animals. We do kennel them separately, but they are going to hear other animals, they're potentially going to see other animals, they're going to smell other animals. So some animals have no issues with that, whereas others, that's going to cause a lot of stress. In your home, you may have your own resident animals that you like to, at one point, get together with your foster animals. With behavior foster animals, we're going to ask that you keep them separate until they're really comfortable. Then we can talk about integrating them with your other animals, but they're still going to know that your animals are there without actually being housed with them. So by scent, smell, all those things that also occur in the shelter. New people, so some of these animals we got in have only ever experienced one person their whole life. Some of these guys we get in have had no experience with people. So during kitten season, we get a lot of found or trapped cats. And so they've had zero experience, and the only real experience in the long run they had was that negative one where they were trapped. But even coming into your home, you are a new person, your family, whoever interacts with this animal, and then part of the process we do have you have your foster animal meet new people. So all those new people that that animal meets can cause some stress. Strange noises. So here at the shelter we have our own noises. Our building makes noises. We have an intercom system. In your home you're going to have different noises. You're going to have the TV, talking on the phone, music. You may live near a busy highway and you have street traffic. So all those new noises can cause some stress in your animal, both here in the shelter but also in your home. Different smells. So here at the shelter we do try to keep our environment very sterile and clean to help with contagion. So those cleaning materials can be very stressful. You will have some of those in your home environment, but not to the level that we have. Some other smells that we don't always think about is ourselves. So when you go interact with your foster animal, you don't want to put on that lotion or that perfume before you go in that room, because your animal's sense of smell, remember we talked about earlier on, is so much better than yours. They're going to be able to smell those. So when you offer your hand, it may actually be more of an aversive. So they're pulling back from that. So an aversive, which we didn't really talk about, they're basically things that deter an animal. So common aversive is a smell. So cats and dogs don't like citrus smell or aloe vera smell. So if you were to use that as a cleaning component or put that on your hands before you engage with an animal, they're going to actually, back up from that. So aversives, again, are anything that they don't like. Smells, noises, textures, a lot of things can be aversive to an animal. New spaces in the building. So again, the building itself here at the shelter can be very stressful. It's a very barren environment. There's a lot of people coming and going. It's not like they were laying on the couch before they came here. Your home is a little bit more comfortable, but it is still new to them. So they are not comfortable in your environment. So they're going to be stressed out by just being in a new space, which again is why we encourage you to confine them so that they don't have as much space to be overwhelmed by. And then lastly is recent events. So what did that animal go through before it came to the shelter? But also, what did that animal go through before you went to engage with it? So for instance, in behavior, we go do behavior sessions. If we do our behavior sessions after animal care did its morning clean, our animal's already going to be stressed out from the morning clean. So you want to keep that in mind for when you engage with your animals at home. You don't want to, if you have people over, putting in a new floor, well, while that new floor is being put in, there's a lot of noise. You're not going to want to engage with your animal then. But even if you went right after, your animal may still be stressed out. So you want to make sure that whatever happened before you went to engage with your animal was a positive. And then keep in mind, every animal, including people, we all have different stress thresholds. So some animals, some people, they just adapt better to change, whereas others do not. And it does stem back to that socialization period. What were they introduced to when they were young? If they only lived in one home their whole life and it's a 10-year-old cat, that cat's going to have a lot harder time to adjust than if you have a young kitten that is still learning its environment. So keep that in mind, that stress can just be, what that animal can handle and what they can't. Okay, so let's talk about some body language that you might see as a result of that stress. So the type of cat we hope everybody sees in the shelter and in their home is the comfortable cat. So when you look at a cat and you're trying to determine what the cat is telling you, are they stressed, are they not, you want to look at the whole cat. The eyes, the ears, the mouth, the body, everything about that cat is going to tell you something. So some things to look for in a comfortable cat is that classic meatloaf position. So that picture you see at the bottom, everything is nicely tucked, but not only is it the body postures we're looking at, the eyes, the ears, the whiskers, everything is relaxed or neutral. So you don't see any tension, any of that. The ears aren't pulled back, the eyes aren't wide, just a very relaxed cat. If you can see the tail, so in a meatloaf position you can't, but if they were to be standing, for instance, they're going to have, that nice relaxed, sometimes we call it the question mark tail, so it's kind of tipped over at the end, but it's not flicking, it's just kind of hanging out there. It may wave as it approaches you, but there's no purposely trying to move that tail around. A comfortable cat will also engage in normal things. So play, grooming, eating, sleeping, all those great things. So if you're engaging with your animal and it is playing with you, it's training, it's eating and drinking in your home, those are all good things. That means that that cat is at least comfortable enough to do those things. They may not always eat in front of you in the beginning, but if they're eating in your home, at least we know we're headed in the right direction. Your anxious kitty, the one in the middle, so this cat is kind of, we call it on the fence. It doesn't quite know how it's feeling. It's really basing its behavior off of what you're doing. So it could go either way. It could become comfortable or it could become fearful. So we call this the ready cat. So this cat's in a position, it's usually either crouched or full on standing, and it's ready to move away if needed. This cat is going to allow you to pet it, but it's going to ripple its skin as you do. The body is going to be very tense, so you're going to see a lot more muscles if you can. Eyes are going to be wide and fully dilated, so you're going to see very little color and a lot of black. And then the ears are going to be all over the place, just trying to pick up all those sounds that they're hearing. And then you have the fearful cat. So this cat is really nervous in its environment or really nervous because of you. So when you first bring a cat home, some of the ones we send home behaviorally are fearful cats. When they first get home, you're going to see a lot of these behaviors because they are very fearful. But by giving them time, play, clicker training, all those great things are going to help the cat become more comfortable. So some things to look for to know if your cat is fearful is the airplane ears. If you've never heard that term, just look at the picture at the bottom with the ears pointed to the side, so they look like little wings. They also have dilated pupils, so full eyes, dilated pupils. These guys are going to be a lot more vocal, so quick to hiss and growl. Their tail is not going to be motionless. It's going to be flicking all over the place. So a fun saying we like to say is, dogs wag their tails, cats do not. So if a cat's tail is moving, it is something to be mindful of. It may be just flicking the tip. It may be lashing the whole thing. So keep an eye on that tail. Another classic thing you may see is the hackles raised. So the classic Halloween cat where the back is arched and all the fur is sticking up. Basically raising up their hackles like that helps them to appear bigger. Some other body language that you might see, we even have a foster option for these guys, is overstimulation. So if you've never heard that term, it's actually really common in cats. So all cats that have the ability to be overstimulated. What differs is their threshold and their reaction. So some cats never ever react. Some may start to show some of these signals we're going to talk about in a second, but never escalate beyond that. Some will go all the way full to biting you. So when you get a cat like this home, you really want to pay attention to those initial signals so that you are not pushing the cat all the way to biting. So some things to look for, again, twitching of the tail. So twitching of the tail could be a fearful cat. It can also be an overstim cat. So that's, again, either the tip or the whole tail is moving. Skin rippling, so again, that is common under an anxious cat, but can also be seen with an overstim cat. So that's why you don't want to just look at one thing to determine what behavior you're experiencing. You want to look at the whole cat. Overstim cats can also flatten their ears. They're quick to expose their belly, so like this little kitten over on this side. So exposing belly on cats, a lot of people have had experiences in the past where an animal shows their belly, they want to pet it. Very common with dogs. We are going to ask you to not pet any animal's bellies. With cats, the reason we're not going to ask you to pet a cat's belly is because overstim is a common reason for a cat rolling onto its back. A cat can also roll onto its back out of fear, kind of display all 5 of its defenses. But a cat may also just lay on its back in a comfortable position. So we want to allow that cat to be comfortable and not engage into it, come up on its face, pet it. So when a cat exposes its belly, do not touch it. Some other things to see are pupils dilated, looks back at hand when petting body. So this is a common thing. We encourage people when they're petting cats to stick to the head and neck because not all cats like their body to be pet. But if you were to do a couple body pets and the cat was doing well with that, sometimes we just get into this petting mode where we're just pet, 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 and we're not really paying attention to what the cat is telling us. So if you see the cat looking back at your hand every time you're petting its body, or the cat is quick to headbutt your hand when it's petting its body, that's a good indicator that the cat does not want you to pet its body. So stop petting its body. You can pet the head a little bit, But if you're starting to see tail twitching, skin rippling, then I want you to stop petting altogether. Because unfortunately, many cat bites that we experience, especially here at the shelter, but even in foster homes, is a result of overstimulation. So by looking for these certain body postures, you can help prevent it from getting to the point of the cat biting. Okay, so something else to look for with cats is cats have a way of indicating that they are getting stressed. Some of these things we don't always pay attention to, so when you are taking these behavior cats home, I definitely want you to pay attention to all of their body postures. So there are some postures or things that cats can do to basically calm themselves. So lip licking, grooming, scratching, and then shaking off. So all these things by themselves may be fine, but if it's occurring when you're interacting with them, so a cat's gonna groom itself. But if you're interacting with a cat and it's quick to groom itself in the moment, that cat is telling you that he is getting stressed out and he is trying to calm himself down. So you need to listen to that cat and give him a little bit of space. That could be walking away, or that could be if you were doing some handling, maybe you move on to something else. And then here's just a fun little cartoon on body language. The tail, like I said, it can tell a lot if it's twitching, if it's fluffed up. So there's different things that a cat's tail can tell you, just like them actually doing things. So playing, scratching, all those things can actually tell you what the cat is feeling as well. So what I want you to do on your piece of paper, I want you to write down what body postures you see. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to write down these different postures. Okay, so we will actually talk about these later on and go over different body postures so that we just can make sure that you are understanding what you're seeing, because some of these different postures you are going to see with your behavior foster cats. So now we're going to move on to dog body language. So just like we broke down the cats into different categories, dogs are the same way. And again, you want to look at the whole dog, not just a couple things. So a common thing people see, for instance, is a tail wag. So they think, oh, you're wagging your tail, you must be really happy. But tail wag can actually occur in a few different places. So we're going to start first with the comfortable dog. So this is a dog that is basically relaxed all around. So avoiding eye contact, loose postures, loose waggy tail, relaxed loose muscles. So everything about this dog, it also readily approaches you. Everything about this dog tells you that it's comfortable and it's relaxed. The next dog, fearful. This dog is going to show a lot more tension. So it's also not going to be looking at you. It's going to be maybe looking at the wall. It's going to have its ears held back. It's going to have, big eyes, the white showing, maybe rolling onto back. So this is the reason why we don't want you to pet dogs' bellies, is because a lot of dogs will roll onto their back out of fear. So we don't want to reinforce that fear. We want to reinforce confident behaviors. Fearful dogs can also escalate to growling and snapping. So you really want to be mindful of some of those postures they're telling you so that you're not putting in the position to growl or snap. And then lastly, we have assertive. So this is that more, what we consider more pushy dog. The dog that we see here in the shelter, they're just already on the offense essentially. They aren't even waiting for you to interact with them. They're just already growling, barking, they're staring directly at you. They have a lot of tension. You are not going to see assertive dogs towards people in a home, but if you were to have this dog meet another dog, which we're not encourage you to go in places like a dog park, but say they happen to meet out on a walk, you could see one of your foster dogs be a little more assertive to a dog that it met. Another body posture you're going to see is what we call high arousal. So high arousal is, think of a dog that's just jumping all over the place, barking, just very aroused. So similar to what we talk about when we say overstim in cats. So a lot of dogs have the ability to be aroused, especially in a shelter environment, because they're not given those outlets. Dogs that are prone to be high arousal are more often those high energy dogs. So high energy and high arousal are different. High energy is usually a young dog or a breed like a lab, just has a lot of energy, and sitting in a kennel is just really hard for them. High arousal is taking that dog with a lot of energy, not giving it enough outlets, and having it start to kind of go over threshold. So not all high energy dogs will become high arousal, but they are more inclined to be those high arousal dogs. So these guys, if you were to be walking them, they're going to be darting on every side of the leash, just going everywhere. These guys are classic teeth chatterers. They have poor impulse control, which is why they're bouncing all over the things. What happens with high arousal is these guys, just like overstim, they're not able to think about what's going on. And so because of that arousal, they can cause some accidents to occur. So when jumping on you, they may nail rake you, they may hit you in the face accidentally with their muzzle. So these guys are dogs that you definitely want to keep an eye on when you're interacting, especially if you're getting down at their level. These are also dogs that we're going to work really hard at giving some sort of stimulation, mental stimulation, to reduce a lot of this arousal. So now we're going to talk about some things that dogs do when they are trying to let other dogs and people know. So when they are stressed out, there is something we call appeasement gestures. So this is common with fearful dogs. When they are nervous, they want to let the other dog or the person know that they are essentially not a threat. So they're going to do things to help that person or dog understand that. So a common thing is where they look. So they're not going to make direct eye contact. They're going to be looking away. They're also going to be moving slowly around the dog, lower to the ground, laying on their back, exposing their belly. So again, another reason, because of that fear, as we talked about earlier, if a dog is showing you his belly, he is trying to appease the situation, which means that he is nervous or fearful in that situation. So we don't want to rub that belly. Paw raises, you might see this a lot with little dogs. It's common with little Chihuahuas to sit there in the corner and be shaking and then lifting up their paws. Lip retraction, or another term for that we call, is that submissive grin. So that picture I put in the bottom corner, when you see those front teeth and the squinty eyes, some people think it's a smile. And it can be. Some comfortable dogs will do a submissive grin, but a lot of times it is because the dog is fearful that they're presenting that submissive grin. They're also lower to the ground when they do that. So again, if you see that, it may seem cute, but that dog is nervous, so you are going to want to change what you're doing. Some other things, it's not uncommon for a dog to pee out of fear. We call it fearful urination. And then you might find a dog, when they approach the person or other dogs, that they're kind of tongue flicking or trying to lick their face. Dogs also show calming signals. So some of the things you're going to see is yawning, lip licking, sitting or laying down, sniffing the ground, standing silently gazing off, drinking, urinating, defecating, grooming, scratching, and shake off. So some of these you will remember from cats. Basically, it is a behavior that allows them to put that nervous energy into something. So they may be starting to sniff the ground, they may do a full shake off. So again, when you're interacting with an animal, if you're seeing any appeasing postures or calming signals, that's a good indicator that that animal is stressed out and you want to change what you are doing. So here is a fun comic about dog postures. So it just kind of shows some of the different things. It includes some calming signals here, looking off, sniffing the ground. So just a fun way to look at what a dog might be telling you. So now I want you to do the same thing you did with the cats. I want you to take a little bit of time to write down the body postures you see for each of these pictures, and I will give you a few seconds to do that, and we will talk about it at a later date. Okay, if you didn't have a chance to get through them all, you can always go back and write them down. Again, we are going to talk about them at a later date. So now let's move on to our body language. So when you see a cat or dog giving you postures that are telling you that the animal is a little nervous or fearful, there are things that you can do to help alleviate some of that stress. So for one, slow down. Go at the animal's pace. Don't rush through things. That's why when you're working with these behavior foster animals, you are going to take it in stages. You're going to start with a lot of hands off and build up to that end stage where we are interacting and petting and meeting people. Talk softly when you're engaging with your animals. Avert your gaze. Offer your side. So if you come at an animal full frontal or you hover over them, both of those can be kind of stressful. So if you just pivot and offer your side and you get down at the level like this lady is doing in the picture, you come off as less threatening and that animal may be more inclined to engage with you. And also anytime you can let an animal approach you, or if you offer your hand to a cat and it headbutts you, you are allowing that animal to make the choice to engage with you. So we do want to make sure these animals have the choice of interaction or not. Some things you can do to help prevent bites in the home. One is watching that body language. So we want to just have you guys understand that behavior is fluid. So a simple thing to remember is behavior is always changing. So what you start with when you engage with an animal may not be what you end with, even if you're only with that animal for a couple minutes. Behavior is always changing. So be mindful of what that animal is telling you and alter your behavior, your body language when needed. Some other things to keep in mind is some of these animals you take home, if you do end up taking overstim cats or high energy dogs, is that they are social. They do like to interact with people. And sometimes when we're interacting with an animal that's social, we forget about that body language. But remember, an overstim cat or a high energy dog, both of them can escalate very quickly. And if we're not paying attention, we may get scratched or we may get bit. So some things to remember is always, always, always watch the body language of the animal. If the cat is starting to become overstimulated, stop petting. When playing with an animal, always use appropriate toys. So we don't want you to use your hands when playing with kittens and puppies. We want you to use toys. For cats, you can use a wand toy. For dogs, we recommend the 2-toy rule. So that way you're not both going for the ball at the same time. You have another ball to throw instead. And then always, always, always watching for signs of escalation. So with high arousal and overstim, we want to look for those twitching of the tail, the bouncing off of things, because if we're starting to see those, we are going to want to disengage with our animal and give them a chance to calm down. Some other things to do to prevent bites is we kind of broke it down really simple in do's and don'ts. So when handling an animal, again, that's not something you're going to do in the very beginning, but as your cat and dog gets more comfortable, is you want to make sure you're handling appropriately. So you're never going to hold an animal near your face. You're always going to hold it down to your side. The classic football hold we talk about with cats, but even dogs, you want to keep them down away from your face. And then some things that we don't want you to do, again, is don't pet the animal's bellies. For cats, that can quickly escalate them to overstim bites. But for dogs, again, we don't want to reinforce those fearful postures. And then never, never, never pick up a dog over 30 pounds, like that picture in the corner. Big dogs are not used to being picked up. They will struggle, and you may actually hurt yourself as you're bending over to pick up the dog. But even though we say don't pick up dogs over 30 pounds, not all little dogs like to be picked up either. So again, handle your animals appropriately. Don't just assume you can jump in and pick them up. Okay, now we're going to talk about home setup and what we expect for you with these foster guys. So when you bring an animal home, we are going to want you to have certain requirements, and we are going to talk about this in the in-home visit, talk about setup and what really works for these different behavior foster animals. So for cats, you're going to get all the basic necessities when you pick up your foster animal, so food, water bowl, litter box, all that. One thing that you may not be provided is an appropriate hiding place. We will send you home with the carrier, but you can also provide like a basket, you can provide a little box, something that the animal can hide in, but not disappear in. So we don't want these cats to be finding a place that they are tucked under something. So for instance, if you were to use your bathroom, you may have a gap underneath your vanity. Well, if a little kitten can get under that and disappear, you're not going to be able to interact with them. You're not going to be able to monitor a food, water, litter box because they may never actually even leave that spot. So we want to provide an appropriate hiding place. As cats get more comfortable, if we do start to open up their space using baby gates, you can keep a cat in an area by stacking some baby gates that we can get you. But basically what we're going to start with is just a small, quiet, contained space. Bathrooms are ideal. Don't think of a bathroom as too small. It's actually going to work really well for the fear guys. But even those overstim guys, it's always great to start with a small space, and then as they get more comfortable, you can increase to an office, a spare bedroom. If you do decide to go with office, spare bedroom, sunroom, any of those, we basically are looking for little to no furniture. So we wouldn't want you to use a room with a bed that the cat could get under the bed, because again, that cat is disappearing and you're not going to be able to engage or necessarily monitor because they may never even leave under the bed. For dogs, we again are going to provide some of these things. So, some bedding, some food, water, bowls. What we need you to provide is basically a safe place for that animal to be, that dog to be. So this could be the bathroom for your dog. It could be an X pen where you have your small dog confined to in somewhere. It could be a bedroom, whatever works for you. But again, with these guys, if you're taking a fear dog, you're really going to want to start small. But even if you're not taking a fear dog, remember that new space can cause stress. So we don't want to give them the full house right away. If you were to give them the full house, it may be too overwhelming, but also they have a lot more stuff to get into. So they could get in the garbage, they can chew on things they shouldn't. So we don't want to give them full access right away. We can send you with baby gates, or we can send you with some X pens. And then with dogs, if you were to have another dog, sometimes we call them helper dogs, can help, with some issues. But with both cats and dogs, you're not going to be introducing your animals to them right away. You are going to let them adjust and get comfortable in the home and then build up to that spot. So here are some pictures or examples of different cat rooms. So a lot of these are bathrooms. And then here's some examples of dog rooms, basically using the X pen component. Okay, so now training expectations. So with these behavior fosters, it's not just about bringing them home and letting them adjust. We do ask that all of our behavior foster parents do training and play. So training, if you've never done clicker training, then we are going to work on that, and I'm going to help you get better with that. But basically, you are going to train every day. Training is not hours and hours. It is literally 5 to 10 minutes. The average amount of time that you are going to train is really going to be based on the number of clicks you can get in. So we recommend anywhere from 8 to 10 clicks. And when you train, so for instance, if you're working on sit, you're going to do 8 to 10 clicks of sit. You're not going to do 50 clicks because you don't want to overwhelm your animal. You also don't want them to get bored with that. So your training sessions are really short. The time you spend with your animal may be a little different, but that training part is going to happen every day, but it does not require a lot of your time. The key to clicker training is finding that reinforcement that works. So you want to find something that that animal eats. For cats, we're going to use things like baby food, tuna fish, sandwich meat, higher value cat treats. Dogs, we're going to use hot dogs, cheese, treats, canned dog food, anything that's really exciting. And then the thing to remember about clicker training, which we'll go over some more, is when you're first learning it, you are going to click at the wrong time, and that is okay. The thing that you have to remember is click always means treat. Even if you click at the wrong time, you still have to treat. So when you first start training, you are going to start with really simple behaviors. The easiest one to do, something we do here in the shelter, is called target, which is essentially the animal touching their nose to an object. For animals, you can use your hand. So for dogs, you would use an open hand. For cats, you would use just your finger because an open hand can be kind of scary. But for some animals, something coming close to the face is going to be scary. So you can also offer something else like a stick, like you see this cat targeting a click stick. If the animal does not target your hand or the stick that you're offering, a lot of people want to help their animal succeed. So they'll either wiggle their hand or their stick, or they will move the stick closer. That is not the animal targeting. That is you doing it for them. So if your animal does not target, what I want you to do is remove the item and then re-offer it in a different space. So maybe you were too far away, so you can offer it closer. You can offer it to the right or the left. But we never want to, wave our hand or move our hand to them. We want them to actually extend their neck. And then if your animal is learning fast, then you can start to go on to sit, down, spin. The key thing about training is I don't want you to focus so much on teaching your animal something. It's not a matter of getting that on a cue. So you don't want your dog to sit on cue. It's great if they do that, but that is not what we are looking for. It is the act of training. It's the act of engaging with the person and good things happening. That's what's helping that animal. Learning something new in a scary environment, that's what's helping that animal. Getting them to sit on cue, that is not as important as just working on getting them to sit. So when you're not training, we are going to ask you to play. So with cats, we're going to have you use a wand toy of some type. And we're going to actually ask you to do a little bit more than just regular play. We are going to ask you to do what we call play therapy. So play therapy actually entails a really good, rigorous play session where the cat gets to chase the wand toy, bite the wand toy, you pull it away. They're going to play anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes till they're tired, laying on their side. And then at the very end of that play session, we're actually going to ask that you give the cats a small protein-based reward. So sandwich meat, tuna fish, their canned food, anything that basically shows them that here you just played with your prey item, now you get to eat it. Having a really great play therapy session is a great stress reducer versus just coming in and moving the wand toy around a couple seconds and leaving. So we really want you to commit to actually doing a play therapy session with your cats every day. For dogs, not all dogs are going to play, especially some of those fearful guys. So we're going to encourage you to try. So, roll a ball around, use a little squeaky toy. If your dog does play, remember the 2-toy rule. So you'd never want to go for the same toy as the dog. You always want to have 2. And then you're never going to pull the toys from a dog's mouth because that can cause them to, try to rebite it. So you could also work on things like drop them or basically just give them a treat to have them trade out for what's in their mouth. And then enrichment. Enrichment is a great way to stimulate an animal in their environment. So we are also going to ask that you provide enrichment. So before we move on to what enrichment is, I want you to write down on your piece of paper what you think enrichment looks like. And I'm going to give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, so enrichment. What is it exactly? Enrichment is basically something that you're placing in the environment to stimulate the environment. So if you think about a kennel at a shelter, they have a bed, they have their food and water, maybe they have a ball. But for the most part, that's all they have every single day. So enrichment is not what they already have in their kennel. Yes, some of those things, like if a dog or cat plays with the toy that you have them housed with, that's great. But if it's something they see every single day, it's no longer enriching. It's something that enhances their well-being. So these are going to be things that are more than just the norm. So some things to think about are feeder objects. So different things that you can put the food in. Frozen treats. Toys that move. Here's another feeder object. Here's a fun one. You can put tennis balls in a muffin pan, but under the balls there's a treat, so they have to kind of push the balls out. Bubbles. Frozen treats again. Here's another feeder object. Here's an easy way to do treats. You just hide them in little pieces of toilet paper. Something that they have to put their paws in. So using their feet, using their nose. Here's another one, man-made one. And then some of the cat treats out there, they're trying to make them a little bit more stimulating. So again, all these things are more than what the cat already has, or the dog already has. So you're going to provide that normal play, but by providing something additional, you are also helping reduce their stress and helping with that mental stimulation. So to kind of break it down in an easier way to look at, so for cats, again, feeder objects. These can be store-bought, or they can be put into things you already have in your house. Different scents and not your other cats. We're talking about, if you were to take a toy from your other cat. So it's not just, it smells differently, but it also is something they can engage with. And then with toys, something again that they can be more a natural behavior, so using their paws to bat at it. For dogs, again, feeder objects, new scents, so again, switching out some toys, and then chew toys, so simulating that natural desire to chew on things. For some of our animals that you take, we are going to provide those enrichment items. So for high energy and over stim, we are going to give you a toy and some feeder objects. For all other animals though, for fear guys, we're going to ask you just to give them something that you have in your home. So you could get a toilet paper roll and put some treats in it that can help them engage with something more than their normal ball. Okay, so for every type of behavior that you are willing to foster, we do have a manual. What we're going to do is provide you that manual at the beginning when you first start to foster. That manual really breaks things down, like I said, into stages. When working with behavior animals, we are going to ask that you go at the animal's pace and go at the stages. So you're not going to move on to the next stage until your animal is comfortable with all the requirements we have for that first stage. So we'll go through those manuals with you and kind of help you understand the different stages. Communication, so we are going to be here for you along the whole journey from the moment you take the foster home to the moment the animal comes back. So every week I am going to check in with you just over the phone. We are going to talk about progress made, any questions that you have, anything that you're struggling with. But if that's needed to happen more often than once a week, we can check in twice a week. Whatever is needed, we can check in email. We are here to provide that support and answer those questions. We are also providing in-home behavior sessions. So when you are first starting out as a behavior foster parent, we are going to do mid-check-in. So if you have a behavior foster cat for 4 weeks, we're going to check in about 2 weeks where I actually will come to your house. I'll answer any questions and do some troubleshooting with you. As you become more seasoned and more comfortable, we are going to do those in-home behavior sessions as needed. So when we are struggling with something, or if you're trying to explain a behavior over the phone and I'm just not understanding it, the best way it's going to be for me to come out and to see that animal. If you like to read, there's some really great resources out there that talk about the different things that we just talked about. So learning theory, clicker training, the power of dog training. So these are really great reads if you do like to read and want to learn a little bit more about behavior and training. And then if you have any questions at this point, feel free to write them down on your piece of paper. What's going to happen is we are going to meet up and I'm going to go over all the answers that you wrote, just trying to answer any questions that you may have about the body postures, stressors, stuff like that, and then answer any questions that you have about here. And then your final step is if you can go ahead and send me an email and let me know some dates and times that actually work for you to do the in-home behavior practice session. So essentially what we are going to do is I'm going to come out to your home. I'm going to help you to figure out a good setup for these different types of behavior animals. I'm going to answer any questions that you have, and then we're actually going to do some fun clicker training games so that you can get a little bit more comfortable with clicker training. Because again, we are asking all behavior foster animals to commit to clicker training every day, to commit to playing every day, and to going at the pace of the animals. So these guys are a little different than normal behavior animals or normal foster animals, is that we just really need to go at their pace. The key is we are just trying a different environment. So we have tried to work with these animals here, and they are just not progressing enough to the point of adoption. So we are changing their environment, but we're still trying to do some of the positive reinforcement techniques to help make that breakthrough. So that is what your home is providing. We're still playing, we're still training, we're just doing it now in your home, which is going to be a lot more quiet and more comfortable than being at the shelter. If you are unable to email me, you can give me a call at 303-751-5772, extension 7207, and just leave me a message letting me know that you are ready to set up that in-home behavior practice session, and again, some dates and times that work for you. Thank you for watching this webinar today. I look forward to meeting with you and working with you in the future with our behavior foster animals.